Well, thanks for everybody for. Thank you, Daryl Davis. It's an honor to be here and to share our experiences and our story. My story began I grew up as a young man in rural Minnesota. My mother and my grandparents came over from Germany, so they were immigrants here to the United States. And a lot of people, when you talk about these type of organizations, I think the general consensus is, well, everybody that's involved in these must have been abused, or they must have had something traumatic happen in their life growing up, or that sort of thing. And those are definitely things that happen, and those are definitely characteristics that affect a lot of people that do join these organizations, but not everyone. And what I want to explain is that anyone, literally anyone, can be susceptible to this type of thinking, to extremism, to racism, to that sort of thing, and it comes from fear, just as Daryl Davis had mentioned a minute ago. For me, I grew up in a normal family, a middle class, working class family. My trajectory into the movement was my grandfather fought in Hitler's army in World War II, and my great uncles did as well. So this wasn't something that we grew up with learning about or knowing. It was definitely not glorified in our family household. In fact, my fascination started with it at a very young age. About 4th grade, I was picking up World War II history books in the elementary school library. And at the time, I was thinking, I got to find my grandfather in these books, in a child's mind. That's what I was doing. I was watching all these documentaries. I was checking out all these books, and some of those books hadn't been checked out for 20 years. I mean, these were dusty books on a shelf, and I still remember exactly where, in the corner at the bottom shelf in the library, in the elementary school library. So librarians and people at the time thought, well, this is kind of strange. You're the first person that's checked out this book since 1967, but really they just thought it was maybe a little odd. That fascination, unfortunately, for me, grew as I got older, and when I moved out of my parents' house, I searched out the movement and I joined it. And within 2 years of joining that organization, I rose through the ranks to become the national leader of that organization, and over 25 years built it up to be the largest organization of its kind in the country. That's a really heavy weight to carry. That's something that when I speak about it now, I have a lot of shame, a lot of regret. It's not something I'm proud of. It's easier, we sit up here and Scott and I are going to share our stories today, and it's so much easier to talk about some of the cases that we're working on and other good things that we're doing now, because we're proud of the work we're doing now, speaking out against hate, speaking out against racism, speaking out against bias. But talking about that time in the movement is very difficult, because once you've broke free from that type of ideology and that type of thinking, it's a life-altering event. But getting back to that story. So at 18 years old, I joined the National Socialist Movement. I was specifically looking for an organization that was tied to as close to the German Third Reich as I could find, and that was the National Socialist Movement here in the United States. It was a continuation of the movement of the original American Nazi Party of George Lincoln Rockwell. It's currently, unfortunately, it's the longest standing organization of its kind in the country as well. Being part of that and being involved in that, what happens is you lose your humanity in the process, basically. You start closing your mind. You start erecting these barriers in your mind where you're closing out the outside world. You're closing out other people that are trying to speak with you, that are trying to get to know you. I closed out my family. I closed out my friends, people I grew up with, just basically closed out everybody and became completely embroiled into this environment behind these barriers, self-erected barriers, where you shut yourself off to the outside world. And when you're in an echo chamber or a bubble or behind those barriers like that, that becomes your whole life. And the people that are around you, that is your support system. That's your family, literally. Those were our brothers, our sisters, things like that. When I was involved those years, and I remember I would date girls from outside of the organization, just regular, what we'd call civilians. And one after the other, literally one after the other would say, Jeff, this organization that you're part of, it's like a cult. This is like a cult. And you're the cult leader. This is weird. This doesn't seem like you. This doesn't seem right. And it was one after the other. And it didn't resonate with me at the time. I said, there's something wrong with these girls. There's something wrong with these people that keep saying this. Why are they saying that? I thought I was doing something good, something noble. And that is a trajectory a lot of people don't understand either. It's not good, it's not noble. Everyone in this room knows that. We know that very clearly now as well. But when you join these organizations, nobody joins these organizations saying to themselves, you know what? You don't wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to get involved in something that's horrible for humanity, horrible for the country, horrible for the individual that's involved in it, horrible for everybody that's around it, and especially horrible for the people that ideology victimizes, minimizes, and degrades. No one says that. We thought, those of us that were involved in it, most of us thought we were doing something good and noble. And that is one of the first steps to understanding that environment, that psychology of it, to be able to reach those people, to be able to reach them and change their way of thinking, to change their hearts and minds. You hear people talk about changing hearts and minds. That's what we're really good at with what we do now. That's where these conversations come into play, and how we can engage with one another to change hearts and minds. If someone like myself that was involved in that type of extremism, in that type of an organization that was that hateful can change, if someone like Scott Shepard, who was an Imperial Wizard in the Klan for years and years and years, can change, these are some of the most extreme organizations in the country. If we were able to change, and we're using that same process to help other people change their lives, to change their lives around, and get back to humanity, get back to society, to civil society, then anyone can change. We don't want to give up on people. We don't. When you look out at society, there's always people that we disagree with, and that's okay too. We don't have to all agree. We don't all have to be friends, but we need to treat one another as human beings and see one another as equal, whether we agree or not. And how that changes. And I don't want to dwell too much on my time in the NSM and exactly there's too much to cover. We'd be talking for hours. But what I do think is important about that story and about that past to discuss and to share with everybody is how that change happens. I think that's the $1 million question, right? It's like, how do you go from being that person? And looking back now, when I look back on my life before, that looks like another person. It's like I know who that guy is, but it's not somebody that I'm proud of, and it's not somebody that I'll ever be again. So you look back and say, wow, that person was ignorant, that person was closed-minded. It's easier to separate it that way. How that change happens. I want to explain this, and it works. Because what I do today, what I do now is I run a 501c3 nonprofit called Beyond Barriers. And Beyond Barriers' mission is to get, it's extremist disengagement, is to get people to disengage from extremist organizations, whether it's far right, far left, religious extremism, extremism of any type, cults, gangs, that sort of thing. We get people to leave that life and then change their life and get back on a better path. That is one of the things that we do. We also work in peace building, changing hearts and minds, and our program of relational dialogue. But that was a little fast forward. Going back to the time in the movement. So I had done many documentaries, many news stories, things like that. That was what I did in my capacity as the commander of the National Socialist Movement. I was doing PR, I was giving speeches, I was speaking at state capitals all over the country. I was traveling the country, spreading hate, racism, and speaking at everything from Nazi rallies to skinhead concerts to Klan rallies, with all the different groups on the extreme far right, typically. So I knew those people in the different organizations. I know a lot of the people that are still involved to this day. And that is one of the reasons why we are compelled to do this work, to speak out like this. You can leave those organizations. You can retire and walk away from most of those groups and be okay. They'll leave you be. But when you leave and you speak out against it, and you start speaking out against racism and hate, you are considered a traitor. You are considered, the worst enemy they have. So we knew that when we leave these organizations, those of us former extremists, we know that. We understand that. But this is our way of giving back. It's our way of using a process of reverse osmosis in a way to be able to reverse that trend. We were recruiters. We brought people into that life. Now it is our duty. It is our inherent duty as members of humanity, as American citizens, as proud Americans, to do the right thing. To actually, instead of just believing that we were doing the right thing like we were before, to actually truly do the right thing, to give back, to bring people together. And how that happens, in my own trajectory, how that happened was when I met this man right here, my brother, Daryl Davis. I was contacted by another film crew, which was nothing new, and they said, well, we'd like you to come down to Montgomery, Alabama, and meet with somebody from the show and talk about your organization and things like that. So we knew at that time, being in the movement, that any type of media wasn't necessarily good, but we felt like no matter what, any opportunities that we had to speak to get the message out there, that we would still recruit people. So 90% of the time, when I got contacted to do these opportunities to speak, I would go do them. I didn't know really who Daryl Davis was at the time. Afterwards, I looked him up, of course, and I said, oh, it all clicked together. Then I knew who he was. But I didn't know who he was when I was first going to meet him. And typically I did background checks. I was checking out the film company, making sure it wasn't some kind of setup and all these kind of things from a security perspective. And I didn't do that for whatever reason, and I'm glad I didn't, because I would have probably come in a little better prepared. But meeting Daryl, it was a life-changing, life-altering event for me. We're sitting across from each other, we're talking, we're going back and forth about music. We're getting along like, old friends, basically. And in Daryl's film, Accidental Courtesy, you can see this moment because it was utilized in the film. But and Daryl spoke about this as well, where he said, we seem to be getting along a little too well. So I interjected something fairly radical, and I said, you know what, I'll fight to the last bullet for my people. And and I just snapped into that mode real quick. But and that was in the film and all that. But the reality of the situation was Daryl got me to think like I had never thought before. And family, friends, people that tried to intervene when I was younger, people that tried to stop my involvement in the movement, even it was about 10 years ago. I'm skipping around in the story a little bit here, but there's so many parts. About 10 years ago, my own grandfather, who'd fought in the Third Reich, tried to take me aside and tell me, Jeff, if you stay involved in this stuff, one of two things is going to happen. They are going to kill you, or they are going to put you in prison. There's no winning, there's no coming out on top, there's no other choices. Those are the two routes. And it's like, I knew that, but there was a disconnect. I knew that. And I said something insulting to my grandfather, who I looked up to so much growing up. I said something that I still feel bad about to this day, about him maybe giving up or it was something awful about, he may have given up, but I will never give up. I was still that embroiled in it that I would speak that way to a man that I looked up to. And it was really difficult because nobody was able to reach me. Sitting down with Daryl Davis in 2016 for his film, he explained to me the story he mentioned up here today about being in the Boy Scouts. We're sitting across from each other. We're having this reciprocal conversation. And that story, hearing that live right in front of me, face to face, and how that affected him as a child, I thought to myself, oh, wow, what would you do if that was one of your kids? It immediately brought me back to thinking about my own children, my own family, and what if somebody would have pelted one of my little kids with rocks or something like that? How would I have reacted? I'm not going to answer how I'd react because it would have been with violence probably. But how would that make me feel? And in my mind, I was on this honorable mission. I was going to do this great thing and save my people, save my country. And yet, here's this individual sitting across from me, and this is how this ideology harmed him and caused him pain as a child. That was the first major seed for me that was planted. I didn't leave immediately. I didn't leave the movement right then and there. I should have, but I didn't. There was other complications. There's no excuse. I can't make excuses for it. But there was other things that were going on, and I felt a responsibility. I felt like I needed to stay. I tried to put lipstick on a pig. I'm sure we've heard that the old phrase. You can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. I was trying to put lipstick on a pig, the Nazi party. I was trying to put lipstick on it and clean it up and say, oh, it's not racism. This is just white civil rights. That's the stuff that I was spewing the last couple of years I was involved. And trying to put lipstick on a pig. And looking back now, I say, man, you rehash this stuff in your head. How could I think like that all those years? How could I not see that? How could I not, have walked away sooner? And those are things that, that have to be processed by anybody that's leaving these things. Soon after meeting Daryl Davis and hearing that, it was another film, White Right Meeting the Enemy. It was a Muslim filmmaker by the name of Dia Khan. And I had spent quite a bit of time with Dia because I was one of the main characters in that film. And if any of you get a chance, please check out Accidental Courtesy, Daryl's film, and White Right Meeting the Enemy, Dia Khan's film. In White Right Meeting the Enemy, having gotten to know Dia fairly well, I was not the only NSM member that had left after having conversations with her, after getting to know her. There were several that left that organization, and they were long-standing guys, high-ranking guys that were in the organization that left as well. And how that took place and how those conversations took place was very similar. Dia's approach was very similar to Daryl's. And we're doing an interview, and she's across from me, and she's talking about how racism affected her as a child growing up, as a young person, how it made her feel ugly, less than, hated, not pretty, all of these things. Seeing that, not just seeing it, but it was like a vibe or an energy that was in the air. I could literally feel her pain. I could feel it. I could see it on her face. It was like the whole aura in the room changed. And that felt like getting kicked in the chest by a horse. It literally took my breath away. That was the beginning of the end for me. After that moment, it was excuse after excuse after excuse why I didn't get out and leave right then and there. But that was the beginning of the end. Dia and Daryl broke through those barriers, and helped reconnect my humanity. Once you go into these organizations, you might have had this like searching mind and all that when you get involved, and you're thinking you're doing something good and noble, you're on this great path. And once you get involved, those doors slam shut. Your humanity is like lost because you start dehumanizing other people. You start othering black people this, Jewish people that, Muslims this. You start othering everyone else and looking down on them. And that is based on fear. That's coming from a place of fear or misunderstanding, not knowing, lack of education. That's why I think it's so important in our school systems that we get in programs and we're working on this. And whenever we get a chance, all of us will speak to students and young people to try to get them to understand these things so they don't go down that path. I couldn't tell you how many people that I've known over the years that have lost their lives, went to prison, killed someone else, or have been killed or shot themselves or things of that nature, including one story where a child shot his father in his sleep, a good friend of mine. That's what this movement does to people. And you can say, when I was in, we always try to justify it. We always say, well, the person that did that synagogue shooting or that mosque shooting or that church shooting, they must have been crazy, right? They were just crazy. We don't agree with that. And some people did. Some people glorified those type of people. Some people call them martyrs and soldiers and venerate them and think highly of them. I didn't feel that way, but I would make these excuses like, oh, that person just went crazy. They didn't go crazy. The ideology was driving some of them to do that. You can't, if it was just one person, if it was just one, you could maybe wash it off as crazy. But when it was one after the other, and of course, the majority of the people are not doing those things, but enough are, because that ideology is making them feel that afraid or that much like, hey, we need to take this mission to the next level and we need to do something about it. And that doing something, for some, is violence. It is harming others. And how is that good on any level? It's not. It's not. Absolutely not. So having those conversations, meeting with people, in my case, it was Daryl Diakon. It was living in the city of Detroit and having conversations with other folks as well that are not public figures. I can talk about Daryl and Dia because they're okay with it and they're public figures and they don't mind. But there's a lot of other people that played a part. It's not quite that simple. But for some, it is that simple. When I was running the National Socialist Movement, there was a guy that was covered in tattoos, head to toe, done time in prison, swastikas and racialist tattoos all over him. And one day he called me up and he's like, sir, I can't be state leader anymore where I'm at. I'm done. I'm just out. I'm done. And I said, well, hold on a minute. You're one of our top recruiters. What's going on? What happened? And I think about this, at the time, I just kind of washed it under the bridge, time to get a new state leader. But I think about it now, and I think his story is important, and I'm going to explain why real quick, and then we're going to get on to Scott here. So he explained to me, he says, I broke down on the side of the road in my car, and I was standing out there, nobody would stop. Nobody would stop to help, and most people looking at this guy, you wouldn't stop. He would look like a scary guy, with tattoos on the neck and head, the whole works, very scary looking individual. And a black man stopped, helped him, got his car on the road, and looked out for him when no one else would. That one incident for that man was it. He was done. That was it. Never heard from him again. He was done in the movement. That was it. That he was out. It doesn't usually work that quick. In the processes where we're helping people get out, it's usually a long process. There's no set amount of time. You can't say, 30 days, 6 months, 5 years. Some people struggle with this stuff for years and years and years. Other people, one snap decision, like the man that broke down on the side of the road. Everyone's brains work differently. But the important thing is to understand, and I think as a community, as an international community, as Americans, we can all have those conversations. And you can say, Jeff, I don't know anybody in my family that's involved in this kind of stuff. Well, let's take it a step further. In society today, with the Democrats and Republicans, they're not talking to each other. We all know these people. We probably have them in our families or in our circles of friends where it's, if you voted for Joe Biden, I'm not talking to you. Oh, you voted for Donald Trump, I'm not talking to you. I won't have that conversation. You're out of the family, I won't talk to you. That's how it was in the movement. That's exactly how it was. So if you experience that type of thing in your families, again, you don't have to agree. You can disagree. In our family, I was so fortunate that my parents didn't just completely disown me forever being involved in this. It cost my family dearly. I talk about the human cost, about people dying and going to prison and that sort of thing. That's one thing. But even the reverberations and the costs of your family. My mother lost her entire career, her lifelong dream, what she wanted to do, because of my involvement in the movement. She's passed on now. I carry that shame and that guilt to this day because my involvement caused that to happen to her. That's just one example of one person. That's just the cases we work on. I hear things that are so much worse than anything that I experienced. So you don't always know what the person across from you is facing, what they've been through, why they've come to their conclusions, but we can discuss that more. I've talked too long, but there's so many things that you can do, and there's ways to encourage those conversations. And please see one another as human beings, as individuals, even if you disagree. You can have those conversations like Daryl had with me and Scott and so many others. My friend.